Good morning. So yesterday I was talking to my brother and I was telling him that he needs to make some bread to go with his jelly and his preserves that he's been selling. And so I'm gonna make some artisanal sourdough, but not sourdough bread. And it's really, really good. So I was gonna make a different recipe, but this is my standard crunchy holy bread recipe, and it's really, really basic. So the first step is you want to get a cup and a half of water, and you want it to be under 110 degrees. So I always temp it because if it's too hot, then it'll kill your yeast. So I put it in my awesome glass Pyrex bowl, and we're gonna put a quarter of a cup of honey in. I'm trying to use up this cheap honey, so I'm putting it in all of my breads. It helps the yeast to bloom, and it does add a little bit of a sweetness to the bread. Not really though. If I didn't know that there was honey in there, I wouldn't know that there was honey in there. So it's pretty, gosh, I should have done this before I started the video. Okay. Yeah, I should have done this before I started the video. But after this, I'm going to put the yeast in there. And then I'm going to cover it, and I'm going to let that yeast bloom, is what it's called. I'm going to let it just get all frothy in the bowl. And I find that you can use any bowl when you're doing bread. I have used a boiling pot. I have used a metal bowl. I've used every single kind of bowl that you can think of. I have used to make bread before I bought my Pyrex bowls. But Pyrex bowls last forever. And my last ones, I dropped on the floor and it broke. So I had to get a new one anyway. So then I'm gonna put a teaspoon and a half of yeast in there. And I'm just gonna mix it up. And then I'm gonna cover this and I'm gonna let it sit on the side for 5 or 10 minutes until it gets really frothy looking. So I'm trying to get this yeast off of my spatula. There we go. Get in there, you. Get all frothy. All right. Now, if I didn't have the lid for my bowl like I do, I would cover it with saran wrap and then put a towel over the top. But that's it. So while this is getting frothy, I'm gonna get my flour and put it into a bowl and my salt and get it just ready for the next step of this recipe. Okay, it's been about 20 minutes and you can see how the yeast is now all frothy and gross looking and stinks, smells yeasty. But that's what you want. You want it to smell yeasty, you want it to look kind of gross. And here I have 3 cups of flour. I did 1 cup of wheat flour and 2 cups of regular organic white flour. Some people use bread flour. I like just regular flour, all purpose. But I do use King Arthur. I just find it's a better flour and I don't have any digestive issues with that flour. So we're gonna stir this all up, and at this point you have to trust the process because it's gonna look like that. It doesn't look very appealing at all, but you want to try to get it all mixed up pretty good. And people use this term, it's gonna look shaggy. Well, mine never really looks shaggy, but it looks like this, like really oatmeal type consistency. And you just want to make sure that you mix it up as best you can, and it's gonna look really weird, but that means you're doing it right if it looks weird. So just keep that in mind. Once I'm sure that it's all combined and there's no like big chunks in there, I'm going to put the lid on it, and then I'm going to put it somewhere that's not warm but not cold either, because what we're going to do now is we're going to wait an hour for it to rise. And what I mean by rise is that yeast is going to activate in the flour, or it's already activated, but it's going to rise that flour. And when that happens, the yeast starts eating the flour, and it creates a chemical reaction that's going to make it all bubbly. And that's what you want. You want it to be really bubbly, and you want it to be alive. I'm going to cover it. I'm going to let it rise for an hour or two, depends on how warm your house is or where you put it. I wouldn't put it in direct sun, but you can put it in the warmest spot in your house. Typically for me, that's my laundry room. And with a lid on it, I'm not worried about lint or anything getting in there. But you can also put it in the oven with a light on. I've seen some people do that. My oven doesn't have a light, so it doesn't really work for me, but that's why I put it in the laundry room. So after an hour or two, I'll come back and make the next part of the video. Okay, so it's been about an hour, hour and a half, and this is what we're looking like now. So we've doubled in size. I'm gonna show you what the next step is. It's called a stretch and fold. And I always put a little bit of oil on my hands before I do this. This is the stretch and fold part. This is kind of what gives it more bubbles and a little bit more structure. It helps the gluten develop so that it becomes stretchy. Now, because this is wheat, it doesn't stretch and fold as good as just plain white bread. So you just gotta kind of keep building it up as you go around. You just want to, and it's not really a stretch and fold, it's just like a fold over and fold, if that makes any sense. And we're just gonna do this a couple times around the bowl. And as you do this, the air bubbles in the dough will deflate a little bit, and that's what you want. You want it to go back down to the same size as it was before you did your first rise. So once, two, of course. And even just doing it just a little bit, I can see I've got a little bit more stretch going on, and that's what you want. You want to just kind of develop that gluten just a little bit so it's sticky. You want it to be really sticky. Okay, so it's been about another hour, and I'm going to do the last stretch and fold before I put it in the pan, and then I'm going to let it rise for the last rise. Okay. So you can tell that by doing that first stretch and fold, it activated a lot more stuff, and we've got a much higher rise than the last time. So we're basically going to do the same thing, only this time we're going to cover it and let it rise in the pan that we're going to bake it in. Look at that. It's stretchy now. It's much stretchier than the last time, and that's what you want. We want lots of holes in our bread, but we don't want it to just be a lump. We want it to actually make a loaf, and you got to activate that gluten to get it to do that. But we've got some really good elasticity, which is what we want. And the bread is warm because that yeast is activated now, and it's actually working just right. So I like to do this a couple rotations just to give it some more structure to the bread before I put it in the bread pan. And I can see there are some bubbles in here, but it's not as bubbly as it was when I first took the lid off. Now you can do this in a metal pan with saran wrap on top with a towel, but I find that it rises better in a glass bowl with a lid. Whether it has a lid or saran wrap, either way, I find it works better in glass. I don't know, there's probably a scientific reason why it works better in glass, but all I know is this works really good. Okay, so I've gone around, stretched and fold for a little bit. Now at this point, some people will turn it out on a counter and roll it and do all this shaping stuff, but I can't do that. I have an injury in my back, and I just can't knead and do all that extra stuff. I just can't do it. So what I found is after I do these stretch and folds, I don't do any shaping at all. I just dump it in the pan. Now this pan, I do have it lined with parchment paper. I got the parchment paper wet and then I put it in there. It seems to work better if it's wet. And then I put it in there. I did spray the sides with some olive oil so that if the bread does touch it, it's not gonna stick. So at this point, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna dump this into there. That's it. And it's gonna spread out however it needs to. And it looks like a really sad, pitiful loaf at this point. But what's gonna happen is I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna cover it with saran wrap and I'm gonna let it rise for another hour. Once it gets taller than the pan, that's when it's ready to go. So I'm just gonna cover it, let it rise again, and then once it gets to above the side of the pan, I'm gonna go ahead and preheat my oven and then get it in there. But yeah, that's it. Okay, so it's been about an hour or so, and my bread has risen just over the edge. So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and start heating up the oven. And it's so cool because if you look really close, of course it's not gonna do it when I'm recording, but it'll start, you can actually see it bubbling and moving. And there's like air pockets and all of that good stuff. So this is when you know that your bread is ready to go in the oven. You want to go ahead and put it in, just like I said, right when it gets to that line. And okay, so now I've got my oven preheating at 350 and I'm going to let it sit on top of the oven and get some of the heat from the oven as it heats up so that it also gives a little boost to the rise. All right, she just came out of the oven. I cooked her for about 45 minutes and I mixed up some honey and some butter. And after about 5 minutes, I'm gonna pull her from the pan and let her cool off on a wire rack so that she can get cold and will stop cooking. And then at that point, I'm gonna put on the honey butter. Okay, so got the bread out of the pan and it's perfectly golden brown around the whole thing. And the reason I do the parchment paper is because it's much easier to get out of the pan if it's in parchment paper. I've had other times when I haven't used parchment paper and it gets stuck every single time. Now I've got my butter and honey mix, and before I even put this on, it's so soft because this is soft sandwich bread. And I'm just gonna smear this honey butter over it because it's honey wheat. And this is gonna make it delicious with a hint of sweet. And it will also make the crust really soft, which is really good for sandwich bread. Okay. And now we just gotta wait at least half an hour before we try it. That's always the hardest thing, is just waiting for it to cool enough and get done cooking enough to be able to slice and eat it. All right, so it's all cooled off now, and now I'm going to cut some bread for my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I love the end piece, so of course I'm gonna eat that, as well as my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. All right, look at that. That is perfect, holy piece of bread. And what I like doing is the holes, I love to put butter on it and let the butter go in the holes, and oh my gosh, it's so good. There is like nothing like fresh bread with holes and some fresh jelly that you can just enjoy wholeheartedly. Well, whole wheatly too. But hope you guys enjoyed the video and let me know if you make it.